We are in Romans chapter 9, and we're going to begin in verse 13 this morning. And we're in a section where God is, through Paul, Paul is the chosen one to write this letter, concerning that of God giving mercy to the ones He's going to give mercy to, and God not showing mercy to the ones that He's not going to be showing those to. We ended last week with verse 15. We'll get there in just a second, but we're going to back up to verse 13. And it says, "As it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated." Now he's quoting Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Why would God say that He loved Jacob, but He hated Esau? All right, one would think that was relatively unfair for Him to say that, but it's not, because there's nothing unjust about God. There's nothing unholy about God. There's nothing random about God or haphazard. Everything about Him is according to righteousness. Everything about Him will be just. And He says, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Now this statement is made centuries after both those men passed on. This is made after their entire history has been done. The history of their lives is over. Jacob and Esau both. They've been gone for a while. But if we go to places like Hebrews chapter 12, we'll see this in verse 16, using Esau as a bad example, because Esau is a bad example. You don't want to be like Esau. And as we have made mention on numerous times, bad examples help us. You don't want to imitate them. You want to learn from their mistakes. Now, good examples you imitate, those are helpful too. But bad examples, you see what they did, how they did it, why they did it, and the correction that was supposed to take place. Now, whether they took the correction or not is it's up for whoever we're talking about. But with Esau is stated here in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 16, "Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears." There was something that he saw as meaningless, that was his birthright, as nothing, that was his birthright, as something that could be sold, which is exactly what he did. He sold it away, and once it is sold, he can't get it back. That birthright cannot come back to him. It's not about to come back to him. And he is showing the type of person that he happened to be when he did that. That he's not too concerned about the future other than just the here and now, the discomfort of this moment. That's all he's concerned about. Nothing else. And he's willing to give away something as precious as his birthright because of being hungry at the moment. And yeah, the man was going to live. All right, he could have gotten food somewhere else, but he sells his birthright, and that's that. And therefore, we have those words in Malachi chapter 1, 2, and 3. "Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated." And Esau follows this same kind of line through his life of things that should be considered as sacred or precious. He does not. Things that should be seen as holy, he does not regard them as holy. Things that should be seen as him being the proper man, the proper father, the proper leader, he doesn't regard those either. Now, we're come back to Romans chapter 10, where we start in verse 13. Now we go to 14. "What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Certainly not. There is no unrighteousness with Him. He will, as it says, let's go to the next verse. For he says to Moses, this is Exodus 33:19 when he says this, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. Now, we can take this and strip it away from everything else the Bible has to say about God and come away with an idea that God is unjust, that God just randomly chooses, I will have mercy on this person but not on that person. Or that He's just absolutely haphazard, or it's just completely subjective as to what He does. I like the way this person dresses, or I like the way this person just is. Okay, and regardless. And I like their sense of humor, therefore I will have mercy on that person. That is completely subjective. He will have mercy on those He will have mercy is a statement of fact, yes, but it's also a statement that goes into His righteous judgment. Now, if we had no evidence of any standard that God had in judging righteousness, we could, well, first off, it'd be a fearful thing. It'd be an extremely fearful thing that we wouldn't know how to please Him. But we can please Him. We can please Him, and we have example after example after example of those who may have done well at a certain part of their life, fell away at a certain part of their life, and returned later in their life. And others that they seem to be on this zigzagging pattern, or more zag than zig, we might say, of where someone like Saul, first king of Israel, here is this mad, jealous, envious man who wants David, who has been anointed the next king by God, who wants David dead. And then coming up briefly and admitting I've played the fool. And briefly showing kindness and restraint, and there is actually a sane man in there somewhere, but then he goes right back down. And he's just as bitter, just as envious, just as murderous as he had been before. He goes right back to where he was. Now, is there unrighteousness with God? And once again, we have these strong words in the Greek, rather in the English, certainly doesn't bring about the weight that answer gives in the Greek. Because is there unrighteousness with God? Really, we could use that as just a rhetorical question. We don't have to answer it. Because everyone would know, no, there is no unrighteousness with God. Yes, there is all righteousness with God. But He's going to answer it. Is there unrighteousness with God? And He uses those Greek words, me geneta, which mean absolutely impossible. That it's not true now, it's never been true in the past, and it will never be true in the future. That God, who is constant and consistent, God who is absolutely righteous from eternity to eternity, never has any bit of unrighteousness about Him. Now, if someone were to ask the question, why would He love Jacob and hate Esau, because that's from verse 13, why would He do that? All we would have to do is look at what God expected out of those men and look at what the men did. Same thing concerning Cain and Abel. With Abel's sacrifice, with Abel's worship to God, God accepted his worship. With Cain's sacrifice, with his worship to God, God did not respect that. He did not accept that. So could it be said that Abel He loved and Cain He did not love? Cain He hated. Well, He loves them both, and He wants Cain to do right, just like He wanted Esau to do right. He wants Cain to do right, and He tells them, if you do well, will you not be accepted? He tells that directly to Cain. And Cain's response to it, his ultimate response, is that he kills his brother. That's his ultimate response. Now, he doesn't do that during that conversation, but it's going to happen after that conversation. He will go, he will find his brother, and he will kill his brother. That's what he's going to do. Now, is it unrighteous for God to say that he loves, not only does he love Abel's sacrifice, because Abel was obeying him, but also that he loved the fact that Abel died righteously? Is that unjust? Is that unrighteous to say that? No. Nor would it be unrighteous then to say Cain's sacrifice is unacceptable and Cain murdering his brother is also unacceptable. Everything about him is going to be righteous. Now, did he make Abel worship a certain way? No, he didn't make him. Were there instructions as to how they were to worship God? Yes, and it went to everybody. Everybody would have known them, including Cain, who did know how he was to worship God correctly. He did know how to do that. And yet, he refused. And yet, Abel didn't refuse. That it was according to their own will what they would do. According to their own will. And even when God goes to Cain directly and has a conversation with him and tells him, puts it out very, very logically, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, then sin will take charge over you. Sin is going to rule over you if you don't get a handle on this, if you don't do well. God is showing a love for Cain, and He's showing Cain an extraordinary amount of compassion and patience when He does that. He's going to give Cain, He's not just going to strike Cain dead because of what Cain did. And there are times when God does do that, of striking someone dead immediately because of something that they did, because of the importance of it, because of they had just been heading in this direction, and they had just been someone like in Acts chapter 12 with Herod. Herod is struck dead there as you have the people of the Phoenicians actually chanting the voice of God and not of a man, and they're praising Herod, and Herod is just struck dead right there. That would be one example of, God striking someone dead, because Herod has been on this path for a long time, and now he's accepting worship. All right, well, it's time, and Herod dies. Was that unfair? No. Herod would have had plenty of opportunity to have done right before he got to that point. Plenty of opportunity to where of development to where when he does get to that point of he's making this speech to the people of Tyre and Sidon, if they would have said that, he would never have accepted it. Not being called a God, but we come back to this idea, is there unrighteousness with God? Absolutely not. Certainly not. Never is there unrighteousness. Not in reality, not in potentiality. Nothing will be unrighteous with God. For He says to Moses, we read this again, verse 15, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. This is not random. This is not inconsistent. This is not unjust. He gives us an understanding of how He judges someone to where He loves their behavior and He loves what they're doing. And another person that He does not love their behavior and He does not love what they're doing. And He's not going to show a compassion on someone who doesn't want His compassion. They want to do what they want to do. All right, well, let me rephrase this. They will want His compassion and their sin as well. That's what they want. They want His mercy and their bad behavior and their wickedness as well. They want both, but you can't have both. You can have one or you can have the other, but you can't have both. You can have the mercy of God, or you can have the judgment of God on your sins. Okay, two things, one of two things. That is what you can have. And none of this is going to be inconsistent at all. Verse 16, so then it is not of him who wills, nor of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. And this goes back to the running theme throughout this book. And we can go back to Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, and we can see all this. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. And for those who may be watching and haven't seen previous lessons, one may be thinking, I'm neither Jew nor am I Greek. Well, yeah, you're one or the other, because the term Greek here just means Gentile, is what it means. There in the Mediterranean world under the Roman Empire, to say that one was Greek was to say that, yeah, you're Jewish. Sorry, you're Gentile. You're not Jewish, you're Gentile. Okay, so then it is not up to him who wills, nor of him who runs. For all have fallen short of all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's chapter 3. But of God who shows mercy, because everyone has sinned and falls short of the glory of God. But we have a way back to God. What is Romans 1:16 about? We have the salvation through the gospel of Christ to everyone who believes. Even when we have fallen short, we can have salvation. Even when we have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, we can have salvation. And it's God who shows that mercy. It's God who shows that mercy. And it will never be that someone will enter heaven because of, well, the fact that they're sinless. All right? Or that they have made it through this life sinless, because you can't. And God knows we can't. We can't do it. We need Him. We need salvation. We need what He gives us. And we will never be able to run or to walk or to will our way into heaven just by our own righteousness, overwhelming righteousness alone. We can't. We need Christ, and we need that sacrifice. We need the gospel. No one is going to get into heaven without, someone who has lived in this life. All right, this would be someone who is past the age of accountability. I'm not talking about children, I'm talking about adults. No one will be able to step into heaven because of their own strength and be able to brag, I didn't need God in any of this. I didn't need Him. Because we all do. Now, let's continue on. Matter of fact, let's look at verse 17. Then we're going to need to go to Exodus 9. For the Scripture says to the Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. Once again, if we were to strip this away, just this verse, one could come to a conclusion that God made Pharaoh in such a way that he would always have a hard heart. That He constructed Pharaoh in such a way that Pharaoh would go through 9 plagues and into the 10th plague before he would finally relent. Okay? God didn't make him that way. Pharaoh just was that way. Now he puts that man, that extraordinary, hard-hearted, self-centered man, as being Pharaoh. That's what God does. That's exactly what he did, so that he could show his power to Israel, to Egypt, to the rest of the world then, because we have, in 40 years later, in Jericho, they can recite what happened in Egypt. They know what happened in Egypt because Rahab is able to, she's from Jericho. She's able to tell them what they have heard. And that was 40 years earlier that those things occurred. 40 years, it's possible Rahab wasn't even born when the plagues occurred in Egypt, and she definitely wouldn't have been there because she's a resident of Jericho, not Egypt. But they heard about it, and the word of it was kept. Now, we read this again, and then we need to go to Exodus 9. For the Scripture says to the Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, that my name may be declared in all the earth. Let's go to Exodus chapter 9 now. And we're going to see some things, because God does harden Pharaoh's heart, but how does he do it? Now, he doesn't take Pharaoh and without any control of Pharaoh and just decide for Pharaoh, you're going to refuse. And you're going to refuse again, and you're going to refuse again. But God does things that Pharaoh immediately, because of his own arrogance, I know that, because of his own arrogance, because of his own self-centeredness, and because of the power that he had, he did not want to give that up, and he's willing to have his country just decimated, just destroyed, one thing after another, after another, after another, and he's okay with that as long as he can keep Israel in the end. It's God who set him up for that. Now 9, and so we're in Exodus 9 and verse 13. Then the Lord said to Moses, rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. All right. Now, he's giving Moses the message to give to Pharaoh. And I want you to look at the message that is given to Pharaoh, because it is a message of warning and compassion. It is. It's a message of warning and compassion, because he's telling Pharaoh what to do to avoid this. And Pharaoh's just going to be hard-hearted, and he's not. He's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. But God tells him in advance, this is what, and he's already told him things earlier. He's going to give him advance warning. This is what you need to do. And you can avoid this altogether. But he's not. Verse 14, for at this time I will send all my plagues to your very heart and on your servants and on your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Ra cannot spare you. Set has no power. All these gods and goddesses and whatnot of the Egyptians, and there are so many of them, none of them are going to be able to help you, because all they are fiction. They're just paintings on a tomb. They're just statues that you have created, lore that someone made up. That's all they are, and they're not going to help you. They can't help you. They cannot stand between you and what Jehovah is going to bring about. That you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Now, if Verse 15, if I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. So he's saying, I've withheld some power here. I could have destroyed Egypt completely. Just as he destroyed the earth under a flood, just as he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, raining fire and brimstone on those cities, and they are no more. No more. No one survived that. No one survived those things. He said, I could have done that to Egypt if I wanted to. And what would we, from a saying like this, what would we expect today? From a saying like this, what would we expect? We would expect to see Egypt still around today. Oh, and it is. He did spare them then, and they're around still today. He spared them. Verse 16, but indeed for this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. For this reason, God made him Pharaoh. For this reason. Now, what did God have to do in all this? God rules in the kingdom of men. He always has. God rules in the kingdom of men. He sets whomever He wants to set up, and He casts down whoever He wants to cast down. He can do it and has been doing it from the beginning. He's been doing that. And that's not saying that some ruler brought in by God is going to do what God wanted him to do, that is being obedient to Him. That doesn't mean that at all, because we can look at someone like Saul. Saul didn't do it, and he was anointed by the prophet Samuel as instructed by God, chosen by God. But Saul doesn't do the will of God. Neither does Jeroboam. And God chose Jeroboam. And Jeroboam was supposed to be a righteous king. He just didn't. Never. He never did. But, verse 16 again. So, Exodus chapter 9, verse 16. But indeed, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. And yet you exalt yourself against my people, in that you will not let them go. You exalt yourself. You're not submitting. You're not following even common sense. You're not doing what is even best for Egypt. You're not showing any kind of concern for anyone else. You exalt yourself. Verse 18, behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now. So all the storms that may have occurred with hail from Egypt's founding. Egypt would have been founded shortly after Babel. Now, that's when Egypt would have been founded. It would have been shortly after Genesis 11, and possibly even the latter part of Genesis 11, that Egypt has its foundation. That's when it begins. From that point on, there has been no storm like this to bring hail like what you're going to discover. Verse 19, therefore send now and gather your livestock. Now, this is the message that God gives to Pharaoh. This is the message that's to be given to Pharaoh. And now He's telling him what He's about to do. And He also told him, I've set you up because I know what you're going to do. Not that God's making him do it. He said, I know what you're going to do. He tells him this is what you're going to do. And then Pharaoh does precisely what God said he was going to do. But he gives him warning. Therefore send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every animal which is found in the field, and is not brought home, and they shall die. Now that's showing compassion. That's showing this in. Now, the hail doesn't have to happen at all. But because God knows he's going to refuse, God is now telling him, okay, this is what you need to do to protect your people and your animals. This is what you need to do. All you got to do is just enact it. That's all you have to do, is just enact it. Verse 20, he who fears the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. But he who did not regard the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. This shows some listened, some did not. Some were able to survive this, and others were not. And it all has to do with God giving even Pharaoh the instruction, giving even him. And God knew what Pharaoh was going to do. Well, how? Because God knows everything. He knows everything. As it sounds kind of funny, but it is true. You cannot teach God anything because He knows it already. He knows everything. And here is God showing through Pharaoh that if there had been another Pharaoh there who would have been more cautious and would have been more fearful of God, that Pharaoh would have been different. And the outcome of Egypt would have been different. But God put in this man who's still in control of himself. He put in this man, this particular Pharaoh. He put this one because He knew what that one would do. But once again, He did not make him do it. Now, we go to verse 18. Therefore He has mercy on whom He wills, and whom He wills He hardens. Let's discuss Christ for just a second. Okay? Look through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you see it to be the case. Every time someone had an encounter with Christ, a conversation, or just listening to Him. Just listening. Every time someone came in the proximity of Christ, one of two things happened. One of two things happened. There was never a neutral third thing. One of two things happened. Either they grew closer to God, or they walked further away from God. Those two things. Well, how is it that Christ can teach hundreds of people or even thousands of people and they're hearing the same message? He's not going out and insulting these and complimenting these others, and the ones who are insulted walk away. He's not doing that. It's the same message being given to all of them, but some obey it, they're getting closer to God. Some disobey it, they're getting further away from God. How is it? It's the same word. And we can talk about Judas for a moment, that Judas betrayed the Christ. He was extraordinary. He regretted it greatly. He's just filled with self-hatred, and he kills himself. Okay. Christ knew who was going to betray Him. He knew who was going to betray Him. Judas receives the same teaching as the rest of the apostles. Nothing was taken away from him. Nothing was kept back, except what Judas just kept back. He received the same love, the same friendship, all the same. The same love that He shows Peter, Andrew, James, and John, He shows to Judas. And He shows to Simon the Zealot. And He shows to Thomas. He shows to them all. But it's Judas who betrays Him. How is that? How is that even one of the apostles, one of the 12, could betray Him? Because his heart is hardened. And it's hardened through sin. Now, while the Scripture does not say those words specifically, we can know that it was sin that brought him there. We can know it because Judas had a sin he would not take care of. Judas was a thief. He's stealing money from the money box. That is a high-handed sin where he's using the ministry of the Christ for his own gain, in illegal gain. That's what he's doing. And he just begins to digress and digress and digress until he is willing to betray the Christ. Now, let's go to Exodus chapter 14, because we're going to show how God can harden someone's heart. But it's a matter of them willingly doing that. He's not making them do that. He's willingly they're willingly doing that. It's like with the parable of the sower, just bringing that in again. The seed is being sown to everybody, but there are those who will not receive it. They won't receive it. That's the hard ground. That's the wayside. That's compact ground, and the seed cannot get any kind of root in that, and it's taken away. And the parable is taken away by birds. From the explanation, Satan takes away what was sown, and that is that. But it's that hard packed ground that doesn't receive it, doesn't see it as important enough, doesn't see it as really being relevant, see it as being from God and that it matters. But we come to chapter 14, it's Exodus 14 and verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp at Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, They are bewildered in the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. All right. Now, what just happened? God is setting Pharaoh up. But it's Pharaoh who falls for it. He's setting it up. Now, while my sense of direction, let's talk about what God is doing. While my sense of direction may not be the best, I'm convinced of it, I could walk from Egypt to Canaan and find my way. Because it's easy. All you have to do is go north until you hit the Mediterranean, then you take a right and follow the coast on up. That's all you've got to do. Or you take the roads that already lead that direction, which no doubt would follow the coast. You just go and you take the roads leading that direction, because there were trade routes in the day. There were a lot of them, not just by sea, but by road. There are a lot of trade routes that were going on. So it's easy to do that, but God doesn't take them that way, because He's got one more thing, and Pharaoh is going to fall for it, but God doesn't make Pharaoh do it. Pharaoh made Pharaoh do it. Now, one would think after 10 plagues, and the last one being the death of the firstborn, and that's anyone who's firstborn, and being that Pharaoh didn't die means he wasn't the firstborn. But we have with this, God sends them off eastward, and sending them eastward, they are heading directly for the Red Sea. Why are they doing that? And messages coming back concerning that they're heading off to the Red Sea, Pharaoh could just say, I don't care where they are as long as they're not here. Their God is taking them somewhere. I don't care where He takes them, just not here. I am through with it. We have had major disasters, and it's all from their God Jehovah, who, if he could just admit, the God. All right? So he could have just said, I don't care. Let them fall off the edge of the earth. I don't care where they go. Just, I'm leaving them alone. But he doesn't. He doesn't. Why? Because he will say, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. I'm going to get them back. So you want another 10 plagues? Is that what you want? Is that what you want? This man doesn't learn. Now, it's not God that made him this way. Once again, he is this way. God is using him, yes. He's using him to show that you have the power over nothing. When it comes to God, you have power over nothing. And a man that will not learn, or let's just put it to everyone, anyone who will not learn is someone who is a detriment to themselves. And they can be a detriment to others too. But learn. Now, we come back to Romans chapter 9 and verse 18. Therefore he has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills he hardens. Now, we've already discussed the fact that Jesus could give the same teaching to a group of people, and some of them getting close to God. Someone saying, that's a prophet from God. Well, that person just came a little closer. Can get closer still, but that person just got closer. That man cannot do these things except God is with him. Now that's Nicodemus. Nicodemus said that. Nicodemus would have gotten closer because he came to that conclusion and he believed it. He didn't want to try to suppress that truth. He's admitting it to himself, and he's acting on it. That here is this Jesus of Nazareth, and he is saying these things. Some saying he's a prophet of God. Some saying, I think that's the Son of David. I think that's the Messiah. Let's listen more. While others are saying, he's a blasphemer. And while Nicodemus may have the false conclusion that he must be from God because no one can do these things except God be with him, I say, and the rest, the Pharisees over here say, no, this is by the power of the prince of demons, Beelzebub. That's how he's able to do these things. He's not from God. He's a blasphemer. Now, notice, did these groups, some getting a little closer, some getting a lot closer, some getting further away, did they receive a different message? No. Did they receive a different level of love? No. Were they given less patience, less teaching? No. They all received the same thing. Some were willing, had willing hearts to accept. Others immediately rejected. But it's the same word. And there's a very, very common illustration between wax and clay. In July, it'd be a perfect time to do this. Now today would not be such a good day to do it, but you put both the wax and the clay on the pavement out here in July, and by the end of the day, the wax will have softened considerably, may have just made a puddle, depending on the temperature, I guess. But the clay doesn't do that. The clay is now just like a rock. It has hardened. That is the difference between hearts. But unlike the clay and the wax, that they can't change, but we can change. we can change because we have a will. And there's only one thing in this world you can control. There's only one thing you can truly control. That's you and what you will to do. It is you, nothing else. You can't control other people. You can wish that they do right, but you can't control them. You can control. Now, we'll continue next week. I want to thank you, everybody, for being with us. And hopefully, we can continue on Romans chapter 9.